In 1964, Ford did something that sent shivers through Detroit's boardrooms and made NASCAR's bosses scramble for their pens. In just 90 days, they built an engine so advanced, so powerful, and so ahead of its time that it never even got the chance to race on NASCAR's biggest tracks. Today, we're diving deep into the real story of the 427 Camry engine, the engineering brilliance, the controversy, the ban, and how the Camry went from NASCAR's forbidden fruit to a drag strip legend that redefined Ford's performance legacy. The early 60s were a golden age of stock car racing, but it was also an arms race. Every year, Detroit car makers would show up with bolder, meaner, and more exotic engines. The 427 Camry wasn't born out of thin air. It was the product of Ford's Total Performance campaign, a corporate-wide push in the early 1960s to dominate every major form of motorsport, from NASCAR ovals to drag strips to international endurance racing at Le Mans. In 1964, Ford's FE Series 427 side-oiler V8 was already a proven powerhouse. It had conquered the high banks of Daytona and powered some of the quickest drag cars in the country. Then, in 1964, Chrysler seemed to have won with the 426 Hemi. With its hemispherical combustion chambers, free-breathing valve train, and brute force, it dominated NASCAR almost immediately. Richard Petty famously used it to win the 1964 Daytona 500 by a full lap. Ford wasn't about to let that slide. The company had been campaigning its FE Series big blocks, like the 427 side-oiler, with great success, but still it wasn't a match for the Hemi 426. Ford knew it needed something revolutionary to beat Chrysler. The orders from Dearborn were simple: build an engine that will beat the Hemi at any cost. And so in 3 months, Ford engineers set out to make an engine to dominate the Daytona 500. They took the proven 427 FE side-oiler block as their foundation. It was already a great piece of machinery with its cross-bolted mains and high-flow oiling that made it perform well in endurance racing. Then they went radical. Instead of sticking with push rods, they designed a single overhead camshaft SOHC for each bank of cylinders. This meant no pushrod flex, faster valve action, and the ability to rev higher, which was perfect for long straights at high speed. Each cylinder head was a masterpiece of engineering. Ford designed it with fully hemispherical combustion chambers to maximize airflow and combustion efficiency, giving the engine the ability to breathe freely at high RPM. Massive 2.25-inch intake valves and 1.9-inch exhaust valves ensured that the air-fuel mixture could rush in and exhaust gases could exit with minimal restriction. Beneath it all, a forged steel crankshaft, heavy-duty connecting rods, and lightweight forged pistons were built to withstand the punishing stresses of sustained operation at up to 8,000 RPM. The official rating? 616 horsepower with a single 4-barrel carburetor, 657 horsepower with dual quads. And get this, they were downplaying these numbers. This engine was a beast. Inside Ford's Special Vehicle Operations SVO division, the project was shrouded in secrecy. Drawings were kept in locked cabinets, and only a handful of engineers were even told the engine's real purpose. Parts were machined in restricted areas, and some components were shipped under vague part numbers to avoid tipping off competitors. But the 427 Camry had one big problem: its infamous long timing chain. Because they were adapting an existing block, the camshafts sat way above the crankshaft. That meant Ford needed a roller chain nearly 6 feet long to connect the crank to the cams. It was tensioned with a spring-loaded idler and guided with nylon rails, and it worked great for short bursts. But for long NASCAR races, there were concerns about chain stretch and timing drift over hours of high RPMs. If the chain whipped even a little bit, valve timing could shift enough to cost performance or, even worse, catastrophic failure. But in drag racing, this was no problem. In a 500 stock race, the chain had a lot of time to stretch. Even though Ford addressed the issue with improved tensioners, the long chain concern became part of the Camry's legend, and some say a convenient excuse for NASCAR officials who were already under pressure from Chrysler. Which brings us to the ban. You see, Ford planned to unleash the Camry for the 1965 NASCAR season, but before the green flag ever waved, NASCAR President Bill France announced new rules. Special racing engines had to be based on mass-produced, factory-installed units, and while Ford argued that it was based on a production engine, NASCAR said the overhead camshaft design was too advanced and not representative of what was available in production cars. And that killed the Camry instantly. Ford hadn't put in any production car, and there was no time to build the thousands required on time. And here's where it gets interesting. Publicly, NASCAR made it seem like it was about keeping the sports stock, but really it was about keeping Chrysler happy. You see, the little girls at Chrysler had threatened to pull out of NASCAR if Ford's new engine was allowed on track. But that was not the end of the story for the 427 Camry. If NASCAR didn't want it, the NHRA sure did embrace the 427 Camry. The Camry got a second life in Top Fuel and funny car drag racing, where its high revving design and massive airflow could dominate. In fact, legends like Connie Kalitta, also known as the Bounty Hunter, Don the Snake Prudhomme, and Sneaky Pete Robinson bolted Camrys into their dragster chassis and radically modified wheelbase machines. In 1965, Kalitta became the first driver to break the 200 mph barrier at an AHRA event with a Camry under the hood. Don Garlitz, or Big Daddy, experimented with the engine, but he eventually struck a deal with Chrysler Hemis due to parts availability. Other Ford-backed racers like Gaz Ronda and Dick Brannon made the Camry the centerpiece of their match race cars. Before unleashing it for drag races, Ford engineers made it even better. The first target? The Camry's one questionable Achilles heel, its 6-foot-long timing chain. For NASCAR's grueling 500-mile races, that chain could stretch, whip, and throw off valve timing. But in drag racing, where victory was decided in seconds, the fix was simpler. Ford and race shops beefed it up with stronger chains, improved tensioners, and better nylon guides, virtually eliminating timing drift during a quarter-mile run. They also reworked the oiling system, ensuring the valve train and crank stayed alive under the brutal shock of nitromethane combustion. Cylinder heads were ported and polished within an inch of their lives, feeding even more air to those huge valves. And when tuners bolted on superchargers, the Camry transformed into a fire-breathing monster, making 2,000 to 2,500 horsepower on nitro. In Top Fuel dragsters, the Camry was a marvel when tuned correctly, but there was a catch. Its long timing chain and unique valve train required more precise maintenance than a pushrod Hemi. That's why some racers still remained with Chrysler for its ease of upkeep. Ford technically sold the Camry through its parts program, but it was never fitted in a production car. Reportedly, Ford built around 500 to 1,000 units from 1964 to 1967, all meant for racers. So why was it not fitted into a Galaxy or maybe a Mustang? Several reasons. First, the engine was simply too expensive to build. On top of that, it was too temperamental for street use. And frankly, Ford didn't need to put in a production car because its purpose was pure racing. Today, the infamous 427 Camry is a legend, not just because of what it did, but because of what it could have done. Had it been allowed by Bill France into NASCAR, it might have rewritten the record books. Instead, it became a symbol of how politics can shape motorsports as much as engineering, and for that, it's a holy grail for collectors. But original factory-built Camrys are incredibly rare. Many were beaten to death on drag strips where 8,000 RPMs and nitromethane fuel were the norm. The remaining survivors are usually found in private collections or installed in restored period race cars. Finding a Fur 27 Camry with correct heads, intake, and valve train is like hunting for a precious treasure. Today, they pay from $60,000 to $85,000 for an assembled Camry today. But as auction data shows, a well-preserved or historically documented Camry engine commands 6 figures. Builders still reproduce parts, and you can even buy new aluminum blocks to build your own. Its influence lives on in every overhead cam Ford V8 that followed. In nostalgia drag racing, the Camry still has a home. Rebuilt and often supercharged, they continue to thunder down quarter miles at Good Guys events and NHRA Hot Rod Reunion, keeping its legacy alive. And in the culture of speed, the Camry holds a unique badge of honor. It's one of the very few engines that never lost on NASCAR's track, because it never got the chance to race there. That what if keeps gearheads debating to this day, and it cements the Camry's place not just in Ford history, but in the story of American motorsport. So, do you think the 427 Camry would have beaten the 426 Hemi in NASCAR?